In the last video, I covered some information regarding whether or not the good old days were a myth, and I focused on a video that was shared by John Stossel, and I gave my own opinion and had a few factoids that backed up the opposing viewpoint. And just because of some things that I was feeling, things that I was seeing that contradicted in my mind what he shared in his video. This week, I have something I think you're going to like. It's someone who brings a lot of receipts, also supporting my opinion that the good old days were not a myth. And it's someone who has a YouTube channel called Nick Invests. He does some voiceover with some animation that I think you'll appreciate if you're a Family Guy fan, because the animation looks a lot like some of the characters you would see on that show, but he just does some voiceover. I don't know how he does that. I'd like to do that myself, to have just some voiceover with some animation one day. But we're going to take a look at what he has to say. Listen to and watch this.
What if I told you that despite working harder than any generation before them, Millennials and Gen Z have somehow managed to become the poorest young adults in modern history? Not because they're lazy or spending all their money on avocado toast, but because the economic game has been rigged against them from day one. My name is Nick, and today we're diving deep into why an entire generation is getting financially destroyed, and it has absolutely nothing to do with their work ethic. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we're about to uncover some statistics that will completely change how you think about generational wealth. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your parents' advice about money might be completely useless in today's economy. Here's something that will blow your mind. Young people today...
So subscribe to him and me, by the way. This is my 59th video. I have 55 subscribers, 1 subscriber for every year I've been on Earth. So I just need to live 10,000 years, and then maybe I'll have enough subscribers to make a difference. Subscribe to Nick and subscribe to me too. Let's continue.
They have 86% less purchasing power than baby boomers had when they were in their 20s. 86%. That's not a typo. That means if a boomer could buy something for $1 back in their day, Millennials and Gen Z would need almost $7 to buy the same thing today when you adjust for wages and costs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Like, every generation complains about how tough they have it, right? Your grandparents walked uphill both ways to school in the snow, your parents had to use rotary phones, and now young people are crying about expensive coffee. But here's the difference. This time, the math actually backs up the complaints, and the numbers are absolutely devastating. Let's start with the biggest financial decision most people will ever make in their lives: buying a house.
If you recall, last week I did show some data from the U.S. Census Bureau contradicting some of the stuff that John Stossel brought up about housing. I've sped up Nick's content just slightly so we can cover more, but this is going to get really interesting. Take a look.
This is where things get really interesting, and by interesting, I mean completely insane. When the average baby boomer turned 33 years old back in 1988, they were living in a world where the median home price was $110,000. Their median household income was around $22,700 per year. Now, here's where we need to talk about something called the home price to income ratio. This is basically how many years of your entire salary it would take to buy a house outright. For boomers in 1988, that ratio was 4-1. Meaning if they somehow managed to save every single penny they earned for 4 years, they could buy the median home with cash. Some high earners could literally pay off their entire house with just 1 or 2 years of wages. Can you imagine that level of financial freedom? Fast forward to 2022, when the average millennial hit that same age of 33. The median home price had skyrocketed to $433,000, while the median household income was around $70,000. That puts the home price to income ratio at over 6-1. But wait, it gets worse, much worse. Historically, financial experts considered a home price to income ratio of 5 to be healthy and sustainable. I guess during the infamous housing bubble of 2006 to 2008, that ratio ballooned to 7. And we all know how that ended. Well, guess what? Like, we're now consistently above those bubble levels, and nobody seems to be talking about it.
I was always taught 2.5 to 3 times your annual salary was safe. Dave Ramsey says you want no more than a 15-year fixed mortgage, fixed rate mortgage, where no more than 25% of your take-home pay is used for the payment. That keeps you really safe. I don't think I had that when I bought the first house, but I still managed to pay it off in 9.5 years. 6, 7, 8, 9 times your salary, that's crazy.
The really fascinating part is when you look at the long-term trends. From 1955 to about 2005, household income generally kept pace with or even outpaced home prices. That was the golden era when people could actually afford to buy houses without selling their firstborn children. But something changed dramatically after 2005. Home prices started climbing faster than income, and they haven't looked back since. When you adjust for inflation, the numbers become even more ridiculous. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, spending $100,000 on a home in 1990 would be equivalent to spending about $377,000 today. But here's the kicker. For everyday goods and services, that same $100,000 from 1990 would only require about $231,000 today to buy the same amount of stuff. Do you see what's happening here? Home prices aren't just outpacing wages, they're outpacing inflation itself by a massive margin. It's like houses decided to run a marathon while everything else was taking a leisurely stroll through the park. Now, you might be wondering why this is happening. Is it some grand conspiracy by the housing industry? Are millennials just terrible at house hunting? The truth is actually more complex and involves several demographic and economic factors that created a perfect storm of unaffordability. First, let's talk about competition. And baby boomers didn't face nearly as much competition when they were house hunting back in the 70s and 80s. There simply weren't as many people living in the United States at that time. Population growth has exploded over the past few decades, which means way more buyers competing for roughly the same amount of housing stock. It's basic supply and demand, except the demand side went absolutely crazy while supply stayed relatively stagnant. Boomers.
Here are some things that Nick isn't going to cover that I just saw today. This is where some of the competition comes from. This story here, AT&T wins a $146 million federal contract. Then they lay off Americans and hire foreign workers. Because I live in Texas, and this came from the Dallas Express, I happen to know something else that they mentioned in this article because I saw it earlier. AT&T is considering, or at least they look like they're considering, not renewing the lease on the building that they have in downtown Dallas. Apparently they did the same thing in San Antonio. They're acting the same way they did in San Antonio, keeping the city government guessing whether or not they're going to renew. And my guess is it has something to do with the employees that they employ, meaning a lot of H-1B folks. Those folks don't tend to live in downtown Dallas. And AT&T now has a 5-day return to office mandate. So if you want people to come into the office 5 days a week, maybe it helps if you're located closer to those kind of people. And I can tell you, more of the Asian Indians tend to live in Collin and Denton County more so than Dallas County. And so maybe they are going to make a move further north, kind of like Bank of America has, kind of like how, who else used to have a big downtown presence? I think it was Fannie Mae. Yeah, Fannie Mae moved upwards. This has something to do with competition, with housing, for sure. This story here also backs the same thing. I didn't know things were so bad at Federal Express, but here's a story, great overnight replacement. The Federal Express decline and fall of Collierville, Tennessee. I didn't know that the founder of the company, Fred Smith, apparently died earlier this year, but in 2022, he stepped away from the CEO role and passed the baton to someone named Raj Subramariam, an Asian Indian, and the culture has changed so much so that 5,000 pilots at FedEx have given a no confidence vote in the CEO. The culture has changed big time. They've lost contracts with the United States Postal Service. Instead of focusing more on growth, which is what Fred Smith did, they're focused a lot on reducing costs, cuts, and there are even some people who see if Federal Express is someone that they're doing business with, they decide they don't want to do business with that particular vendor. People have cut off Federal Express and instead pay more for UPS just because they don't have so much of this Indian culture. I'm not saying these folks crapify everything, But it's interesting when you see things get crapified and you look at who controls the execution, and you go, well, maybe it's a coincidence. This whole AWS thing that we had, this outage last week that affected at least a third of the internet, because AWS, Amazon Web Services, controls, I heard today, 37% of internet and a lot of apps. Well, I know because I run this particular YouTube channel and the types of videos I've done in the past focus on H-1Bs, and I found out that Amazon is the number one user of H-1Bs in America. So you got to go, hey, if they had that kind of outage, who was running their IT? That probably led to that outage. And then you have this story here. Again, all three of these stories I saw today. Urgent warning to Gmail users as 183 million passwords are stolen in a data breach. Here's how to check if your account is affected. As someone in IT, I wouldn't recommend you take their advice other than to change your password. Don't go to this site and then see if you've been pawned. Don't go there. I wouldn't. Just assume you've been hacked and change your password. But again, who do you think runs the IT department there at Gmail? When I know, because of the type of content I've been doing, 2 out of 3 people in tech these days are foreign-born. The American-born tech worker is in the minority right now. They're likely running Gmail. The foreign worker is likely running AWS services, Amazon Web Services, and they have such a stronghold there at AT&T that AT&T is likely considering moving closer to where those people live. This story, which is put out by Dallas Express, I don't know who they are as a publication, but they're flat out saying AT&T wins a $146 million federal contract. Usually when you're working with federal government, they prefer to work with citizens. But hey, they're laying off Americans and hiring foreign workers, maybe to do the internal work, and then have some citizens do the federal contracts. I don't know. But the hits just keep coming. It's just Monday this week, and these 3 stories, I was not looking for them, and they showed up. I feel that they were pertinent to this video that we're going through by Nick Speaks, and I think this is something that he didn't necessarily cover in this part about housing. I had to inject it myself just because I know about that. But let's continue with Nick.
Also had another massive advantage that most people don't talk about. They were more likely to get married early and stay married, which meant they were combining 2 incomes from a much younger age. When you're 25 and married with dual incomes, buying a house becomes significantly more achievable than when you're 28, single, and trying to do it all on your own salary. This brings us to another fascinating shift in social patterns. According to research from the Pew Research Center, more than 4 out of 10 millennials don't live with a family of their own. That's about 45% compared to only 31% for previous generations. The silent generation, those born before the boomers, had only 15% living without their own families. Millennials are staying single longer, getting married later, and having fewer children. While this might be great for personal freedom and career development, it's absolutely terrible for home affordability. But wait, there's more. And by more, I mean student loans, which deserve their own category of financial devastation. This is where the generational wealth gap becomes truly obscene. The average cost of tuition at 4-year institutions now ranges from $30,000 to $50,000 per year. Let that sink in for a moment. Baby boomers could often work part-time jobs during college and graduate with little to no debt. Many could even pay for their entire education with summer jobs. Today's students are looking at debt loads that would make a small country nervous. Student debt has ballooned into a $1.7 trillion crisis. Over the 30 years between 1991 and 2021, average tuition prices more than doubled, while the average loan balance at graduation tripled from around $10,000 to about $30,000. And here's the really scary part, about 7% of student loan borrowers now owe more than $100,000. That's mortgage-level debt for something you can't sell, can't return, and in most cases can't discharge in bankruptcy. The cruel irony is that college degrees are simultaneously becoming more expensive and less valuable.
That is the truth. I've said here on this site, if God forced me to go back into my 18-year-old body, but I get to keep my 55-year-old brain, I would not go to college. Or if I did, I'd probably go the first couple years at a community college and then finish out at a 4-year university, because the return on investment is not there. Just empirically speaking, as someone engineering degree, you don't have to be an engineer. You just have to know math. What it costs to get the same education that I got is 6 to 9 times what I paid. And you would say, well, inflation, Tori, inflation. No, the person coming out of college today with the same education that I had, their starting salary, if they're able to find a job, their starting salary might be 2.5 times what mine was. But in order to get the same return on their investment, it needs to be 6 to 9 times what mine was, because that's what it costs. And you're not going to get that with 0 years experience. I have 30 years experience and I don't get paid 6 to 9 times what my starting salary was. So he's correct on that. And I think people are noticing. And if not Gen Z, then maybe the children of Gen Z will do things differently and recognize, hey, university system is a scam. Furthermore, I'll tell you this. I've never said this before, but my wife, when we got married, she was working at a university. And we moved, and she was looking at potentially getting a job at another university. It was a public university, and I don't know if they all still do this. I don't even know if this university was doing this. This university we were looking at was Old Dominion University out in Virginia. On their website, they had published salaries of the people who worked there. Now, they might still have that, or they might not, but whether they still have it or not, I couldn't help but notice that I had to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll before I found somebody who made less money than me at a public university. I think I found the assistant to the assistant to the associate to the entry level professor made less than me, but everybody else made more. So it's worth it if you want to get into that system and get on their payroll. But in terms of getting your piece of paper and turning that into something, it's not what it used to be. Put it that way. Let's continue.
The number of college graduates has increased by 250% since 1970, which means there's significantly more competition for entry-level positions. Jobs that used to be truly entry-level now require experience, creating this impossible catch-22 where you need experience to get experience. Meanwhile, starting salaries have barely budged when adjusted for inflation. The average starting salary for a decent job hovers between $50,000 and $60,000 per year, and many graduates struggle to even reach that level. So you've got massive debt, stagnant wages, and inflated housing costs. It's like playing a video game where the difficulty level keeps increasing, but your character's stats stay the same. This economic pressure cooker extends beyond just housing and education. Let's talk about transportation costs, because even getting around has become a financial nightmare for younger generations. The average car payment today is over $700 per month, with loan terms stretching to nearly 6 years. 6 years. That's longer than most people keep their phones, and yet we're financing vehicles for longer than some presidential terms. When baby boomers were buying their first cars, they could often pay cash or take out short-term loans that didn't feel like a second mortgage. But here's where it gets really fun. Gas prices have Millennials and Gen Z paying 40 to 60% more than boomers did in their 20s when you adjust for wages. So not only are you paying more for the car, you're paying significantly more to put gas in it. It's like the entire transportation system looked at young people and said, you know what, let's make this as expensive as possible. And don't even get me started on car insurance. Young drivers are paying premium rates that would make a hedge fund manager weep. The average young adult is looking at insurance costs that can easily run $200 to $300 per month, especially if you live in a major city. That's nearly $4,000 per year just for the privilege of legally driving a car. You're already paying $700 per month to own. Credit card debt and consumer loans have reached all-time highs, creating a financial death spiral for millions of young adults. When your housing costs are sky high, your student loans are crushing you, and your transportation costs are through the roof, what do you do when unexpected expenses pop up? You put them on credit cards, of course, and with interest rates on credit cards now hovering around 20 to 25%, that emergency dental bill or car repair becomes a long-term financial disaster. The really maddening part is that older generations often look at these statistics and blame young people for their financial struggles.
I don't blame you. I lament what's going on, and to the extent that I can make a difference by sharing what it is that I know, voting for policy to change things. I'm not I'm not a boomer. I'm Gen X. So, my parents are boomers, and I see that they maybe they're not noticing the changes I am noticing, and it ticks me off to the highest of ticked-offity. And the president has to at least appear that he is as concerned about the domestic issues as he is about ending these foreign wars. He's going to have to pivot because people need to see and feel some real change by this time next year, not just because it's going to be midterm elections, but because that's what folks voted for last November. It's because it's what we deserve as Americans, what we fought for, and he's going to have to make some serious pivot. It's a shame that he has to be the one that's always doing this. You would think with all these capable folks that he's hired into his administration, they can do it, and I think they can, but they're just not going to get the press that he gets. He does have the title of president. Even before he was president, he could get the media's attention. You know, J.D. Vance is the vice president, but if he said something that's equally important or equally effective, it probably won't have the reach that Donald Trump as president would have. And so a lot of things are having to be done by the president himself. It's a shame. Even Congress, when it came to some of the negotiations they had with the great big beautiful bill, the president had to go over to Congress and try to gain some votes. You know, what's the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House doing? Why are they so ineffective that the president has to go over there himself to help? They have the majority. You can't get unified. Anyway, let's get me on something else. Let's continue.
Point to expensive coffee drinks, subscription services, or dining out as the reason millennials and Gen Z can't afford houses. But let's do some quick math here. Even if you eliminated every single discretionary purchase a young person makes, even if they lived like monks and never bought anything fun ever, they still couldn't make up for the massive increase in housing, education, and transportation costs. You could skip every latte for a decade and still not have enough for a down payment in most major cities. The math simply doesn't work. It's like trying to bail out the Titanic with a coffee cup. Sure, you're technically removing water, but you're not even close to solving the actual problem. Social media has made the situation even more psychologically damaging. Young people are constantly bombarded with images of their peers seemingly living lavish lifestyles, buying homes, taking expensive vacations, and driving new cars. What they don't see are the credit card statements, the family money, or the crushing debt behind those Instagram posts. This creates a toxic cycle where people feel pressured to spend money they don't have to maintain an image they can't afford. The gig economy, which was supposed to provide flexibility and additional income opportunities, has instead become a necessity for survival. Millions of young adults are driving for ride-sharing companies, delivering food, or picking up freelance work just to make ends meet. What previous generations did for extra spending money, current generations are doing to pay rent. The side hustle isn't supplemental income anymore. It's often the difference between financial survival and complete disaster. But here's something that really drives me crazy about this whole situation. Despite all these financial headwinds, despite the fact that the economic deck is completely stacked against them, millennials and Gen Z are still being told they're lazy or entitled, they're working multiple jobs, dealing with unprecedented levels of economic stress, and somehow they're the problem.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Gen Z and millennials are lazy or entitled. I see the struggle. And I hate having to look downstream and say, you guys have it harder than I did. Remember, I was married, and my wife's children, they would be considered millennials, maybe Gen Z. And I know I was going to have to sit down and have a talk with them and get them to understand, look, the reason why I want you to do X, Y, Z this way, even though we did it ourselves a different way, is because I'm noticing that things are going to be are harder for you or your generation than they were for me. And they shouldn't have to be that way. No, we're going to do what we can to be your safety net, but we also want to set you up for success. And you can't do things the way that we did and expect the same results because it's being stacked against you, right? We know the game that's being played. How do we play it to the best of our ability as a team?
It's like blaming someone for drowning while you're standing on their head, pushing them underwater. The retirement situation is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this generational wealth crisis. Social Security, which previous generations could count on as a reliable safety net, is projected to face significant funding challenges by the time current young adults reach retirement age. The traditional pension system that provided guaranteed income for retirees has largely disappeared, replaced by individual retirement accounts that shift all the investment risk onto workers themselves. Young adults today are being told they need to save more for retirement than any previous generation, while simultaneously dealing with higher costs for everything else. Financial experts recommend saving 15 to 20% of your income for retirement. But when housing costs alone are eating up 40 to 50% of someone's paycheck, that advice becomes mathematically impossible to follow. The healthcare system adds another layer of financial complexity that previous generations didn't face to the same degree.
That is also true to the nth power. I'm now in a role where, for tax purposes, I'm considered to be a sole proprietor. And I had to look at health insurance. And I assume that because there are all of these health insurance agents, that maybe there was something outside of the Obamacare thing for individual healthcare plans. There weren't. I mean, they all. I made the mistake of putting my name and address and phone number into some website, and I got flooded with a bunch of phone calls. And all they're doing is just going online, and I could do that myself. Go to Obamacare.com or whatever it's called, and look at the plans, and they all stink. They're about $700 a month just for the premiums, and you still got like a $7,000 deductible. So you're paying $8,400 a year just for the premiums, and it hardly covers anything. And you still got $7,000-8,000 deductibles. Like, a lot of people are deciding to just self-insure in that area. I decided not to do that. Because I am a Christian, I did, with one of the health sharing accounts that's out there, because I don't want to go bankrupt. In case there's something expensive that doesn't, the most expensive things are things that involve some sort of transplant. But for broken bone here or a little surgery there, I could probably come out of pocket on some of that. But I'm with a health sharing account to get some deals if I need to. But because of COVID, I've lost a whole lot of faith in the health care system. And so I'm doing a lot on my own, treating thyself and learning more about naturopathic ways and seeing maybe some naturopathic type care providers as opposed to the traditional allopathic stuff. I've lost all kinds of faith in that, but that's neither here or there. Let's stay with this.
Young adults are dealing with higher healthcare costs, less comprehensive insurance coverage, and more out-of-pocket expenses. A single medical emergency can wipe out years of careful saving, creating a constant state of financial anxiety that affects every decision they make. Even starting a family has become a luxury that many young adults feel they can't afford. The cost of childcare in many areas now exceeds what previous generations paid for their entire mortgages. Raising a child from birth to age 18 is estimated to cost over $250,000,
and it shouldn't. Having a family should not be considered a luxury.
The whole of this financial stress cannot be overstated. Young adults are experiencing higher rates of anxiety and depression, much of which is directly linked to financial insecurity. They're delaying major life decisions, living with roommates well into their 30s, and putting off dreams because the basic necessities of life have become unaffordable luxuries. What makes this situation particularly frustrating is that many of these problems are solvable, but they require systemic changes rather than individual solutions. You can't budget your way out of a housing crisis. You can't side hustle your way out of stagnant wages. You can't meal prep your way out of healthcare costs that have tripled in the past decade.
And the reason why they've tripled, the reason why we have a housing crisis, when you have, some people estimate 10, some people estimate 20 million people coming across the border illegally in the past 4 years during the Biden administration. When you have 55 million people in America on some sort of a visa, and then those people can have children, even for someone who's just here on a student or worker visa or a spousal visa or a travel visa. If they have a child here, then they become the anchor baby. And people who are citizens are competing with that. When you have people come across the border illegally and then our governors and mayors and presidents will put them on a bus or a plane and then ship them further into the nation to some sanctuary city. A sanctuary city by nature, it should be automatically illegal. I was surprised when I first heard that term years ago. I'm like, what? That's just blatant, middle finger at our legal system. These people should be arrested and impeached. These are the systemic things that he's beating around the edges, but I'm coming right out and saying it. It's because the population has been altered, not organically, but on purpose to replace citizens, to enrich our betters. We're just the serfs, and these other people are the nobles, and they deserve all the riches and the land and the food. And it's going to take more than just politics, I think, to change that around. The people's hearts are going to need to be changed. They're going to have some sort of regeneration spiritually to start doing some of the right things and recognize there is some value in citizenship.
The technology sector, which was supposed to create new opportunities and level the playing field, has instead contributed to wealth concentration and geographic inequality. Tech jobs pay well, but they're concentrated in expensive cities where housing costs eat up most of the salary advantage. Meanwhile, traditional middle-class jobs in smaller cities have seen wages stagnate while costs have continued to rise. Looking at international comparisons makes the situation even more depressing. Young adults in countries with stronger social safety nets, subsidized education, and regulated housing markets are achieving traditional milestones of financial independence at much higher rates than their American counterparts. It's not that young people everywhere are struggling equally, it's that American young people are dealing with a uniquely dysfunctional economic system that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term societal stability. But here's what really gets me fired up about this whole situation. Instead of acknowledging these structural problems and working to fix them, we're having debates about whether young people deserve financial stability. We're arguing about whether they should be able to afford houses or start families or retire with dignity. These aren't luxury items we're talking about. These are the basic building blocks of a functioning society, and we've somehow made them unattainable for an entire generation. The solution isn't rocket science, but it requires people to actually acknowledge what's happening instead of pretending everything is fine. If you're a young adult watching this and feeling completely overwhelmed by these statistics, I want you to know that your frustration is completely justified. You're not crazy for thinking the system is rigged against you, because frankly, it is. But here's the thing that drives me absolutely insane about this whole mess. We keep getting told that the solution is individual responsibility, work harder, save more, make better choices. It's like telling someone to swim faster when you've tied concrete blocks to their ankles. Sure, technically they could try to swim harder, but maybe we should address the concrete blocks first. Despite all of this economic chaos, there are still some strategies that can help you navigate this financial wasteland. The key is understanding that the old rules don't apply anymore, so you need to play by a completely different set of guidelines. First, let's talk about housing, because this is where most people get completely destroyed financially. The traditional advice about spending 30% of your income on rent or mortgage payments, that's adorable, but it's based on an economy that no longer exists.
Yeah, he's right about that. And I like that he does end the video here talking about some potential solutions. It's going to be a hard pill to swallow, but let's take a look at it. I think he's on to something.
In many markets, finding anything decent for 30% of your income is about as realistic as finding a unicorn that does your taxes. If you're trying to rent, you might need to push that percentage higher, but here's the crucial part. If you're spending 40 or 50% of your income on housing, every other expense needs to be scrutinized with the intensity of a forensic accountant. You can't have expensive car payments, you can't carry credit card debt, and you definitely can't be spending money on things you don't absolutely need. For those dreaming of homeownership, the math has changed so dramatically that you need to approach it like you're planning a military operation. That old advice about putting down 20%, forget it. Many successful first-time buyers today are putting down 3 to 5% and using first-time buyer programs that previous generations didn't need because houses actually used to be affordable. The automobile situation is where I see people make some of the most devastating financial mistakes. That $700 monthly car payment I mentioned earlier, that's not just a payment, that's a wealth destroyer. Over the life of a typical auto loan, you're looking at paying $50,000 to $60,000 for a car that will be worth maybe 15,000 when you finally finish paying for it. So there you have it. Millennials and Gen Z aren't broke because they're buying too much avocado toast or because they lack work ethic. They're financially struggling because they're trying to play a game where someone changed all the rules without telling them.
So what do you think? Was he onto something? I thought so. I thought it was very well done. I've watched a few of his videos. I've subscribed. If this is your first time checking me out, do me a favor, consider hitting that subscribe button. If you had to watch a video to watch this, if you had to watch a commercial in order to watch this video, trust, I did not receive a cent of that. I'm not monetized yet. In order to be monetized, you have to have 1,000 subscribers and at least 4,000 hours of viewable time. So I can have a lot of viewable time, but until I get 1,000 subscribers, it won't matter. So again, if you're watching for the first time, consider hitting the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, and it will help me out. Perhaps you can be a part of the growth that I'm having, and perhaps you could help me get to the point where I no longer have more videos than I have subscribers. This is my 59th video. I have 55 subscribers. I appreciate everyone that has subscribed, but let's make this party a little bigger. I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.